Last time we spoke about the invasion of Mindanao. In April of 1945, the US launched an invasion of Mindanao under General Eichelberger, focusing on Illano Bay. Initial assaults were swift, and American forces quickly captured vital areas due to disarray amongst the Japanese troops, who were struggling with low morale and supply shortages. The Japanese were under significant pressure, with commanders ill-prepared to mount a robust defense as American troops advanced towards Davao. Fierce battles unfolded, including attempts to seize key positions, but the Japanese forces, including remnants from earlier campaigns, faced overwhelming and relentless assaults. Despite stiff resistance in some areas, the Americans ultimately made considerable territorial gains, significantly weakening Japanese positions. This successful operation in Mindanao laid crucial groundwork for further advances in the Pacific theater, marking a decisive phase in the war. And as this chapter closed, it was evident that the Japanese resistance in the region was drawing to an end. This episode is the Allied Invasion of Borneo. Welcome back to the Pacific War podcast week by week, and I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about World War II? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on World War II and so much more. So go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at The Age of Conquest, The Fall and Rise of China podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you give my personal channel a look, over at the Pacific War channel on YouTube, or Echoes of War, found on major podcast platforms. Over on YouTube, I released a rather viral episode about the wacky world of Chinese World War II dramas. And over on Echoes of War, we are releasing a 5-part series covering the Malayan campaign of World War II. If you'd like to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, we talked about the Japanese invasion of the Dutch East Indies. Now it's time to talk about how Holland strikes back. But not exactly. I just wanted to finish that Star Wars reference. For an extended period of time, the Australian forces had valiantly fought on the island of New Guinea during a crucial phase of the Allied war effort. Now they've been assigned to garrison duties in remote areas, conducting minor offensives against a desperate enemy, more concerned with obtaining food than engaging in battle. At the same time, General MacArthur deemed it politically unwise for Australians to take a prominent role in reclaiming the Philippines, an American territory. He also found it politically unfavorable for American troops to participate in restoring Dutch or British authority in the Indies. But recognizing the urgent need to secure the oil fields in the British and Dutch parts of Borneo, so as to supply accessible oil for the push towards the Japanese home islands, Lieutenant General Leslie Morsed's 1st Australian Corps was designated for the operation to retake Borneo, designated Operation Obu. Should note that after a period of illness, suffering from malaria and a skin condition, the fighting general, George Allen Vasey, had finally recovered by February of 1945. General Blamey, who still had doubts about his physical fitness, despite Vasey being given an A by an Army medical board, reluctantly appointed him command of the 6th Division, then into the action in the Aitape-Wewak campaign. Vasey flew north to take up his new command. The aircraft Vasey was traveling in, a RAF Lockheed Hudson A-16-118, took off from the RAF station in Archerfield on the afternoon of March the 5th of 1945. Due to a cyclone that was ravaging Queensland's coast at the time, the aircraft crashed into the sea about 400 meters out of Machans Bay, just north of the mouth of the Barron River, 2 kilometers short of Cairns Airport. Vasey was killed in the crash, along with all of those on board. His body was recovered from the crash site and was buried with full military honors in Cairns Cemetery, along with those like Major General Rupert Downes and Lieutenant Colonel G.A. Bertram. Vasey's concern for his men outlived him. The men called him Bloody George, not after his casualties, but after his favorite adjective, and Vasey's personable style of command attracted immense loyalty from them. "Vasey owns the 7th, wrote a Melbourne journalist, but every man in the division believes he owns Vasey." Thus, now it fell to General Stephen to retain command of the 6th Division at a time already engaged in combat in the Aitape-Wewak campaign. The initial plan was to land Brigadier David Whitehead's 26th Brigade at Tarakan on April the 23rd to establish an airstrip for supporting aircraft for subsequent operations, specifically an assault on Balikpapan by the remaining forces of Major General George Wooten's 9th Division on May the 18th. Following that, 10 days later, a brigade was set to land on Banjarmasin to secure air support for the planned invasion of Java by the entire Corps on June the 27th. Ultimately, the operations in Banjarmasin and Java were cancelled. The Tarakan landings were postponed to May the 1st. The Balikpapan invasion would instead be conducted by Major General Edward Milford's 7th Division on July the 1st, and the 9th Division was tasked with the invasion of Brunei Bay on June the 10th. Consequently, by the end of March, Morsed's headquarters and the entire 9th Division had relocated to Morotai, where they would prepare to rehearse for the impending invasion. In March of 1944, General Tarakan organized the 7th Area Army to establish a new defensive line across Malaya, Singapore, Sumatra, Java, and Borneo. And yes, you heard that right, General Tarakan. For those of you who listen to my Fall and Rise of China podcast, well, this guy is infamous, the intelligence officer who worked on nearly all the significant false flag operations during the Second Sino-Japanese War. Working as said intelligence officer, he played a key role in the orchestration of the Hongkuten incident, the Mukden incident, kidnapping Emperor Puyi, and the Marco Polo Bridge incident, amongst many other incidents. He was a bona fide mastermind behind numerous false flag operations and the Manchurian drug trade, earning him the moniker Lawrence of Manchuria. Now anticipating an impending enemy invasion, Lieutenant General Yamawaki Masataka reorganized the Borneo Defense Army into the 37th Army in September, placing it directly under General Tarachi's Southern Command. This force gradually received reinforcements from the 56th and the 71st Independent Mixed Brigades, the 25th Independent Mixed Regiment, and several smaller units. Despite this, the command was under strength and poorly equipped, as most of its available equipment and experienced troops were reassigned to more critical locations in the Southwest Pacific. By the end of the year, under the leadership of Lieutenant General Baba Maseo, the 37th Army had stationed the majority of Major General Nozuki Seiji's 56th Independent Mixed Brigade at Tawa, Major General Yamamura Hioe's understrength 71st Independent Mixed Brigade at Kuiching, most of Colonel Iamura Shinanichi's 25th Independent Mixed Regiment at Tawi Island, Rear Admiral Kamada Michiaki's 22nd Naval Special Base Force at Balikpapan, along with 3 battalions in Tarakan, 2 battalions and a naval unit in Tarakan, and 1 battalion each in Kudat, Beaufort, and Miri. However, by 1945, both Baba and Tarachi recognized that the enemy was likely to first target strategic locations on the east coast, before establishing a strong presence in western Borneo to prepare for an invasion of Malaya. Consequently, they decided that the majority of the 37th Army should be concentrated around Brunei Bay, leading to orders for the 56th Independent Mixed Brigade to march overland towards northern Borneo. The 370th Independent Battalion remained in Tawa, while the 369th Independent Battalion was sent to garrison Banjarmasin. Additionally, half of the 454th Independent Battalion was dispatched to Balikpapan, and the other half at Banjarmasin. This left only the 455th Independent Battalion and part of the 2nd Guard Unit on Tarakan. Early in April, the strength of the Japanese forces on Tarakan was estimated to be about 4,000, of whom 2,500 were base troops. On the eve of the attack, however, largely because of information indicating that a battalion had been moved from Tarakan to Balikpapan, it was estimated that only 1,500 to 2,000 troops remained on the island. Aerial photographs showed 5 gun positions on the southeastern tip of the island, covering the channel along with ships normally entering Tarakan. Around Linkas and Tarakan, there seemed to be 15 anti-aircraft guns, and 9 medium and 5 light anti-aircraft guns seemed to be around the airfield. The whole of Linkas Beach was protected by parallel rows of posts, rails, and pipes driven into the mud and extending into the sea, a distance of about 125 yards from the high water mark. And between the beach and the road were anti-tank ditches about 25 feet wide. A group of oil tanks were near the beach, and it was possible that the Japanese might try to impede an attacker by flooding the oil all over the sea and the swamp near Puasun River to set it alight. Likewise, the Air Force had taken pains to destroy these tanks. Fieldworks had been seen, there were concrete pillboxes built by the Dutch, and it was suspected here and elsewhere tunnels had been dug into the hills. Units stationed on Sandakan were also ordered to move towards Brunei, leaving the 554th Independent Battalion behind. Furthermore, due to challenges in supplying Tawi, the 25th Independent Mixed Regiment was withdrawn to Borneo in February, and instructed to march towards Jesselton, where it was expected to arrive in May. During this time, little was done to enhance the island's defenses, and the overland marches took a significant toll on the soldiers' stamina. Meanwhile, enemy air raids intensified, severely disrupting communications. Between April the 11th and the 29th, Air Commodore Arthur Harry Coby's Australian 1st Tactical Air Force, along with Major General Paul Wurtsmith's 13th Air Force, conducted several air assaults on Tarakan and Tawu, targeting oil storage tanks, artillery positions, radar stations, defenses, and various buildings. On April the 27th, Rear Admiral Forrest Royal's Task Group 78.1 departed Morotai, carrying Whitehead's 26th Brigade, protected by Admiral Berkey's cruisers and destroyers. Over the next 2 days, this force executed a naval bombardment on shore targets while minesweeping units cleared and marked the approach route within 800 yards of the beach at Sandow Island. Early on April the 30th, the 2 and 4th Commando Squadron launched unopposed on Sandow, where they established an artillery battery to support engineers in clearing obstacles from the invasion beaches. After successfully completing the task with just a few sniper mortar attacks, the main convoy reached the southwest coast of Tarakan Island an hour before sunrise on May the 1st. Following heavy air and naval bombardments prior to the landing, Whitehead's assault waves began their approach to the shore, supported by rocket fire from LCI gunboats. Around 8 a.m., the 2 and 23rd and 2 and 48th Battalions landed on Green Beach and Red Beach, respectively, without facing any opposition. However, once they moved further inland, they encountered intense fire from Lincas Hill and Roach. The 2 and 23rd Battalion launched an attack and captured both locations, while the 2 and 48th took the Finch and Parks position as they advanced to secure Collins Highway Ridge. Throughout the day, the remaining units of the 26th Brigade landed despite poor beach conditions and overcrowding, with the 2 and 24th Battalion held in reserve along Anzac Highway. By nightfall, the brigade managed to hold an area about 3,000 yards wide, at the base about 2,000 yards deep. Early on May the 2nd, the 2 and 23rd seized Milko, with minimal resistance, advancing further north to Page's Feature and Hospital Spur. Simultaneously, the 2 and 48th quickly secured Lyons at a junction with Burke Highway, with the 2 and 24th effectively attacking Wills, Stewart, and Frank's positions with support from aircraft and artillery. In the late afternoon, as one company moved up Anzac Hill towards the airfield, Lieutenant Colonel George Wharf's other companies converged on the Essex Feature, which was captured without any opposition during the night. The next morning, the 2 and 24th attacked the airfield from the south and east, although they successfully took the airfield ridge at a high cost. Their late assault on the Ripon position to the north was repelled by determined enemy defenders. At the same time, the 2 and 48th conducted reconnaissance towards Peter and Sykes Features, with the 2 and 23rd managing to secure the area between Gleneaglen Highway and Pamasuan. However, their assaults on Hospital Spur and Tarakan Hill were unsuccessful. Fortunately, Burke Ridge was found to be abandoned by May the 4th. By then, Whitehead had already instructed the 2 and 23rd to advance east to join up with the 2 and 24th in their attacks on the airfield, with the 2 and 3rd Pioneer Battalion and the 2 and 4th Commando Squadron taking over their positions in the west. The commandos then launched an attack on Tarakan Hill. Despite being initially held down by fierce enemy fire, they eventually forced the defenders off the high ground through sustained pressure, tank support, and a sweeping maneuver to the right. Simultaneously, the 2 and 48th advanced and successfully took control of the Evans Feature, with a company from the 2 and 24th attacking the Penenki-Barrow stronghold after intense artillery barrage, managing to secure the position just in time to fend off the Japanese, who had retreated during the bombardment. Additionally, Wharf planned another assault on Ripon, but heavy Japanese shelling ultimately compelled him to call it off. On May the 5th, as the commandos and pioneers continued to diminish the remaining strongholds in Tarakan Hill, the 2 and 48th successfully cleared the road north of Otway, although they faced greater resistance near Sykes. Ripon was also discovered to be abandoned and was swiftly captured, though the Japanese still controlled the high ground to the north. Finally, on May the 6th, the 2 and 48th launched another attack on Sykes and successfully cleared the hill this time. While capturing the airfield and the town accomplished Whitehead's primary objective, the Japanese continued to hold the rugged interior of Tarakan, indicating that much fighting lay ahead until the garrison was completely defeated. By the evening of May the 6th, fairly copious information obtained from prisoners and Indonesians and from captured documents indicated that the enemy had about 390 naval troops in the Mount Api area, about 400 troops and civilians in the Fukukaku headquarters, 200 from Zanzibar along the Snacks Track to Otway, 300 on Otway and in District 6, 300 in the Amau River area, and about 60 at Cape Juanta. Having lost the airfield and the water purifying plant and hospitals, quote, "The enemy at this time was displaying a decided disinclination to hold ground. In particular, he was shunning any ground which could be subjected to heavy bombing, shelling, or attack by tanks, or against which large-scale attacks could be launched by our troops. The enemy was now directing his operations to delaying the attackers, particularly with mines, booby traps, suicide raids, and isolated party fighting, to the death in tunnels and dugouts. Now we are traveling right back to Okinawa. After the unsuccessful general attack on April 19th, which yielded minimal gains, Generals Hodge and Buckner were preparing to push the offensive southward, fully aware that breaching the first Shuri defense ring would be slow and a costly endeavor. On the western front, the primary enemy positions on Kakuzu Ridge had been entirely circumvented, with General Grinner directing his troops to advance and focus on cleanup later. Consequently, on April the 20th, the majority of the 165th Regiment secured the coastal region before launching a southern attack that encountered immediate and fierce resistance in the rugged terrain north of Gusukuma, particularly that around the Item Pocket. The center of the Japanese resistance lay in the I section of Target Area 7777, which came to be called Item Pocket. In military terminology, I is called Item. Actually, the pocket was the hub of the enemy position, and from it, like spokes of a giant wheel, extended 4 low ridges, separated from each other by ravines and rice paddies. Potter's Ridge ran north from the hub, Charlie Ridge to the northeast, Gusukuma Ridge to the southeast, and Ryan Ridge to the southwest. Lying between Gusukuma and Charlie Ridges and sloping to the east was a cone-shaped hill called, by the Americans, Brewer's Hill. A gulch ran along each side of the hill, known as Anderson's Gulch on the north and Dead Horse Gulch on the south. The grounds were superbly suited for active defense. Typical Japanese positions were connected by tunnels along the sides and under the crests of the ridges. Ryan's Ridge in particular was honeycombed with such defenses. From Item Pocket, the enemy had excellent command both of the coastal areas to the north and west, and to the open land to the east where Route 1 ran north-south. The Japanese had long been aware of the defensive value of this position against either a beach landing on the northwest or an attack from the north. Months before the Americans landed, Japanese troops and Okinawan laborers were boring tunnels and establishing elaborate living quarters and aid stations. The area was held by 2 companies of the 21st Independent Infantry Battalion of the 64th Brigade, 62nd Division, supported by an anti-tank company, a machine gun company, and elements of an anti-aircraft, artillery, and motor units. At least 600 Japanese occupied the pocket, reinforced by several hundred Okinawans. Only through persistent efforts was the 1st Battalion able to reach a position east of Gusukuma by nightfall, while the 2nd Battalion successfully took control of Potter's Ridge and Fox Ridge but failed in its attempts against Ryan Ridge and the Item Pocket itself. The leading platoon was well up on the slopes of Ryan when Japanese atop it, utilizing mortars, machine guns, and artillery, cut off the rest of Company E. While the company commander, his clothes torn to bullets, and the rest of the company struggled back to Fox Ridge, the leading platoon continued doggedly ahead. Its leader, Sergeant Ernest L. Schoff, managed to reach the top with 8 of his men despite almost constant fire. He was ordered by radio to hold it until relief came. The men hugged the ground as darkness slowly descended upon them. Then, from 3 different directions, 50 to 60 heavily armed Japanese set upon them. In wild hand-to-hand fighting, the 9 men beat off the attack. Private First Class Paul R. Cook fired 4 cases of ammunition into the enemy, shooting down at least 10 before he was killed. With grenades, rifle butts, and the enemy's own weapons, Schoff and his men killed another dozen before the Japanese finally withdrew. With 2 of his men killed, another missing, and 2 wounded, Schoff led the survivors back to his company during the night. Over to the east, the 106th and 105th Regiments tried to advance south towards the village of Iso and the Pinnacles, but they were hindered by heavy enemy gunfire. In response, Colonel Wynne dispatched his 2nd Battalion to maneuver around the East Pinnacle to reach the village of Natama, where Companies F and G were ultimately being repelled by a strong Japanese counterattack. As they retreated in the chaos, they faced an ambush from Japanese infiltrators, resulting in significant casualties. Despite these challenges, the 106th Regiment and Wynne's 3rd Battalion managed to bypass the West Pinnacle and advance with relative ease, halting 200 yards southwest of Iso. Additionally, Wynne's 1st Battalion fought its way to the western edge of Kakuzu Village and nearly cleared Kakuzu Ridge of its eastern point before being ordered back to the escarpment to support the 2nd Battalion and halt enemy breakthroughs there. At the same time, General Bradley ordered the 381st and 382nd Regiments to advance towards Nishibato Ridge and the Tanubaro escarpment. In response, Colonel Dill's 3rd Battalion moved along Tombstone Ridge, clearing out the enemy from caves and tombs, and reached the southern end just in time to join Colonel Halloran's 1st Battalion for a surprise offensive against Nishibato. They quickly captured the crest, but ultimately were driven back by determined defenders. However, this partial victory prompted Halloran to deploy the 2nd Battalion in the afternoon for another assault to the south. By the day's end, the 381st was entrenched along the northern slopes of Nishibata Ridge, though at a significant cost. Further west, Dill's 2nd Battalion also pushed forward despite persistent fire from rocky crags, with attempts by the 184th and 17th Regiments to try and attack, but they were unsuccessful. They could not catch up with the 3rd Battalion. Meanwhile, General Arnold targeted Oki Hill, but his initial assault was quickly halted by enemy mortar machine gun fire. 2 armored flamethrowers successfully advanced about 400 yards ahead of the infantry, neutralizing an enemy mortar position on Oki Hill's west slope. Consequently, the Americans concentrated their mortars and smoke to cover the enemy positions, allowing a competent company to launch a surprise attack that secured the crest of Oki Hill, although the isolated troops would soon have to fend off a series of fierce counterattacks. The next morning, the 32nd Regiment launched an attack down Skyline Ridge with 2 companies. However, they were quickly halted by mortar fire at a deep road cut in the middle of the ridge. Despite this setback, the troops persevered, largely due to Sergeant Theodore MacDonald's efforts, and eventually gained control of the entire forward face of the ridge. When east of the road was cut, a man in a stalled 3rd Platoon, Company E, was killed. Sergeant Theodore MacDonald, a geochemical motor company observer, was impelled to take drastic action. MacDonald had frequently joined men on the line, and had shown qualities of determined infantrymanship. Now infuriated, he gathered up a handful of grenades and ran straight into the face of machine gun fire along the slope to the point underneath the spot where he believed the enemy gun had to be located. He then started up the 20-foot embankment. When he looked over the crest, he failed to spot the gun, but he did see 3 enemy soldiers, and he grenaded them. He made 2 trips to the bottom of the embankment for fresh supplies of grenades, but it was not until his 3rd trip to the crest that he had located the machine gun. MacDonald then slid back to the bottom, grabbed a bar, and he mounted the embankment with it, only to have the weapon jam after the first shot. It's actually quite common with that gun, by the way. He skidded back to the bottom, seized a carbine, and went back up for a 5th time. On reaching the crest, he stood up and fired at point-blank range into the machine gun position, killing the gunner and 2 covering riflemen. MacDonald then hurled the machine gun down the slopes behind him. A motor that he had found in the position was also sent crashing down the hillside. MacDonald was later awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his heroism on this occasion. Lieutenant Fred Kapp, commanding Company E, sent troops to reinforce MacDonald immediately, and the position was consolidated. Then Company F, on orders given as a result of the sudden development, pressed the attack down Skyline Ridge, and by about 6 p.m. the entire forward face of the ridge was occupied, and only the knob on the lower tip was causing any trouble. Over to the west, with Colonel Patchler's B Company attempting another attack on rocky crags, Dill's 3rd Battalion reorganized and encircled to reach Nishibata Ridge via the 381st Regiment, launching an eastward assault that made good headway until they were met with fierce enemy counterattacks that forced them to a halt. Simultaneously, Halloran coordinated an attack on Nishibata, which was successfully repelled by the defenders. Colonel May's 3rd Battalion was then deployed to fill the gap on the gorge. Overnight, a large number of Japanese troops had moved from the Uruso-Mure escarpment to set up mortars and machine guns in the Kakazu pocket, prompting the 27th Reconnaissance Troop to advance towards Kakazu, where they became pinned down at the village's edge. As a result, Colonel Stebbins' 3rd Battalion was ordered to position itself at Kakazu West. Looking west, the majority of the 105th and 106th Regiments were tasked with neutralizing the pinnacles, but with little success. They did manage to clear the road to the escarpment summit of mines and obstructions to facilitate tank movement. Finally, Colonel Kelly's 2nd Battalion launched another unsuccessful attack across the mouth of the Item Pocket, while Company F attempted to advance along the coast using amphibious tractors, but was likewise repelled by intense fire from Ryan Ridge. The 1st Battalion also pushed southwest into Gisukuma, but without armor support. They made minimal progress against the machine guns in the village and fire coming from the Item Pocket. The enemy's defenses were very effective on the east. Here, the 1st Battalion had a major supply problem on its hands. 2 blown bridges along Route 1 east of the Item Pocket were holding up vehicles of support units. During the previous night, fire from the pocket had driven off the engineer platoon working at the site, and it killed the platoon leader. Early on the 21st, Lieutenant Golden, the Bailey Bridge expert, came up with 10 truckloads of material. His engineers worked for an hour but had to stop in the face of almost ceaseless fire from the pocket. Colonel Kelly then ordered scouts to find another stream crossing. A bulldozer cut a bypass around Anderson's Gulch near the railroad, but when, at about 10 a.m., the operator nosed his machine gun out into the open, he was shot in the air. General Greiner and Colonel Kelly's observation post at the time ordered Lieutenant Colonel Walter F. Anderson, commander of the 193rd Tank Battalion, to push and bypass through. Anderson himself climbed into the battalion's sole remaining tank dozer, and he completed the bypass. A 47mm anti-tank gun, hitherto silent, scored a direct hit on Anderson's tank, killing him and his guide. The bypass was now blocked and it had to be abandoned. This breakdown in supply over Route Number 1 seriously affected operations east of Gusukuma. Colonel Mahani's 1st Battalion attacked southwest early on the 21st into Gusukuma, but without tanks or cannons, the troops made little progress against machine guns in the village and fire coming from the item pocket. Mahoney's left company did not reach a point 400 yards north of the village of Yefasu, the furthest advance yet registered by the 24th Corps, since April the 19th. But here the troops were stopped by a network of enemy positions. Concerned about the significant vertical separation between his battalions, Kelly decided to deploy his 3rd Battalion in an effort to fill the gap and simultaneously penetrate item pocket. Consequently, the American forces advanced through Dead Horse Gulch, with Company K fighting nearly to the center of the pocket. However, they were ultimately compelled to retreat due to heavy losses and intense counterattacks. On April the 22nd, Kelly opted to hold and enhance his current positions while conducting extensive patrols. Looking further east, as the 105th Regiment regrouped following a night counterattack from Kakuzu, Stebbins' 1st Battalion systematically located and neutralized enemy positions behind them along the escarpment. Brigadier General William Bradford also took command in the Kakuzu area, bolstered by the 3rd Battalion, 17th Regiment, and most of the 2nd Battalion, 165th Regiment, successfully containing the pocket. Further west, the 383rd Regiment replaced the weakened 382nd, while the 2nd Battalion advanced down Nishibaru Ridge to capture the village and higher ground facing Hill 143 to the south. Meanwhile, the 3rd Battalion made minimal progress towards the gate of the Tanabaru escarpment. Additionally, Patchelor's Company B initiated another attack on the west side of the Rocky Crags, supported by howitzers, tanks, and armored flamethrowers. However, once again they faced hand grenades and mortar shells raining down from above, resulting in heavy casualties and the need to retreat. Finally, the 32nd Regiment maintained control of the forward face of the Skylight Ridge but made no attempt to advance, while patrols scoured extensive sections of the southern slope to reach the abandoned eastern face of Hill 178. That night, artillery provided cover to the beleaguered defenders of Colonel Yoshida's 22nd Regiment, who took over along Skylight Ridge. Following several days of inactivity, 41 kamikaze planes once again launched on April the 22nd. They successfully sank the minesweeper Swallow and 1 LCS, while also damaging 2 destroyers and another minesweeper, resulting in the loss of 25 aircraft. The next day, the 32nd Regiment remained stationed on the northern slopes of Skyline Ridge, except when conducting patrols or securing caves. This allowed the Japanese defenders to withdraw overnight from the remaining positions around Hill 178. With Company B worn out, the rest of the 1st Battalion, 17th Regiment joined the assault on the Rocky Crags, which fell with little resistance. To the west, medium tanks and armored flamethrowers finally launched a direct attack on Nishibaru Ridge and the Tanabaru escarpment, successfully destroying most of the enemy positions, although few territorial gains were actually made. Further west, Wynn's 1st Battalion executed a surprise attack on the East Pinnacle, managing to capture the position after fierce hand-to-hand combat. At the same time, the remaining defenders at the West Pinnacle initiated a desperate banzai charge towards Iso, where they were ultimately overwhelmed. Kelly then ordered Company I to conduct a probing assault on Ryan Ridge and the item pocket, while Company C ascended Brewster's Hill, but was unable to descend the steep side to join the fight. On April the 24th, no new attacks were launched due to a confusing mix-up of orders, but preparations were made for an assault the following day. After an artillery barrage, Bradford's task force finally attacked the Kakuzu pocket with 4 battalions. However, they faced no enemy resistance as the Japanese had abandoned their positions overnight. Due east, the beleaguered defenders in front of the 96th Division had also retreated, leading to the fall of the Tanabaru escarpment, its village, Hill 143, and the rest of Nishibaru Ridge without any opposition. In a similar manner, the 17th Regiment ascended Hill 178 with only a few scattered artillery rounds landing nearby. The Japanese forces had resisted fiercely for 5 days, but with the first ring of the Shuri defenses breached at multiple points, they chose to withdraw under the cover of a heavy mist and a light fog that night before. Even so, this advancement was minimal, as it was clear that reaching Shuri would take considerable time given the rate of progress over the first 3.5 weeks of this operation. Nevertheless, Buckner believed that any significant landings on the Minatoga beaches or between Machinto Airfield and Naha could not be logistically supported and would be vulnerable to strong enemy counterattacks. Therefore, he dismissed proposal to deploy the 77th Division or the 1st Marine Division for these efforts. Instead, it was decided to move the 3rd Marine Corps and the 77th Division from northern Okinawa to Iijima to replace the 24th Corps in the Shuri area. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kingston Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kingston Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingstongenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Age of Conquest Fall and Rise of China podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. If you'd like to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. April 1945, the Allies launched the invasion of Borneo, led by General Morsed. Swift assaults secured strategic areas against quite demoralized Japanese troops. Despite fierce resistance, American forces gained ground, crippled Japanese defenses. It seemed victory was well within sight, and it was a signal to the end of Japanese influence in the region.